Record.
This meeting is being recorded.
I'm going to go ahead and mute folks who aren't talking just so we don't get any feedback. But please, if you'd like to say something, unmute yourself or raise your hand so we make sure we see that you've got something to say. So thank you for coming to the Iowa Hunger Coalition's monthly meetup for March. If folks could just share in the chat, if you're able to, your name. If you're with an organization, you can share that. If not, that's okay. Kind of the area of the state you're joining from today. And one thing that you would like to take away from today's meetup. So if you want to just take a moment to put that in the chat, just so we can kind of understand where everyone's coming from today and kind of which parts of the state we've got folks joining from. I'll go back to that for 1 second in case anyone missed that. Name, organization, where you're joining from, and one thing you'd like to take away from today's meetup. So I made some slides today just to help me stay on track because otherwise I can ramble. And just wanted to make sure if in case we've got any newcomers, we share just a little bit about who the Iowa Hunger Coalition is. So we're a statewide group working on advocating to end hunger and food insecurity in the state. We are a 501c4 organization. We have a volunteer board of directors. And then we work with a paid lobbyist. We work with John and Cindy Peterson through Peterson Consulting. And we are fully member funded. Which I add the little hint because I always forget to mention, we're only able to do our work through the support of our members. We have organizational and individual memberships, and we do have some kind of suggested amounts, but we really do not want cost to be a barrier for anyone, and everything helps. So today we're going to go over a quick legislative update. I'm going to try to keep it quick. And then I really want to hear from folks about what you're seeing in your community and maybe how this SNAP legislation is showing up in discussions that you're having. So first, I thought I would kind of give an update on what is in these two bills. So at the start of the session, we had House File 3 and Senate Study Bill 1105. Those are now House File 613 and Senate File 494. A couple of weeks back, we saw some big changes made to these bills, and they passed out of committee. I'll give an update on where they are in the process just in a little bit. But we saw some alignment between the bills. So both of the bills now contain an asset test. The asset limit has been increased to $15,000. There is an additional exemption for a second vehicle of the first $10,000 in fair market value. So one vehicle is fully exempt. A second vehicle would be up to $10,000 exempt, and additional vehicles would each have a exemption of $4,250. I'm maybe getting too far into the weeds on this. What we are still opposed to it because what we've seen in other states is even people well below that asset limit end up being removed from the program simply because they can't meet the additional reporting requirements that come with that asset test. I know we've used the example of Pennsylvania in the first year that they had an asset limit established. They saw 4,000 households removed because they were above that limit, and another 110,000 households who were removed simply because they couldn't meet those additional reporting requirements. So that's really what we're worried about. There's also a piece that would require people to basically fill out a computerized questionnaire when they're applying for public assistance programs to prove their identity. So this would be kind of rather than showing two forms of ID, they would fill out this computerized questionnaire. We think it could have the potential to expand access, but without an opt-out of that process. Um, we just don't think it's a good idea. Are we really going to turn someone away who has forms of ID and, doesn't want to fill out the questionnaire or has issues with memory or, some of these questionnaires could be about addresses people lived at a decade ago. So again, we just think that's another barrier. There's also this real-time eligibility verification piece. We've seen this in years past. Really just is increasing the amount of data that the state is checking against, increasing the frequency of when they're checking it. We think this could, you know, really increase administrative burden. They've been talking about how this will streamline the process, but if this automatic process is flagging people's cases, that still requires a HHS worker to then follow up on that case, send written notice, and people have 10 days to respond. So we really think this could increase administrative churn as well. So those are the three pieces that are the same, and I'm sorry that was a lot. The House also has some additional pieces. So in the House bill, House File 613, there is the ban on purchasing candy and non-sugar-free soda from SNAP. This requires USDA approval. And I think it's highly unlikely that USDA would grant that approval. Maine tried this exact same thing, and it was denied both under the Obama and the Trump administrations. One positive thing in House File 613 is $1 million for the Double Up Food Bucks program. That's a nutrition incentive program. If folks are using their SNAP benefits to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables from selected real retailers or farmers markets, they can actually kind of increase the benefits that they can receive. So it's a good positive nutrition incentive program. But the way it's written in the bill right now is that funding is entirely contingent upon the state being granted the waiver from USDA to ban candy and non-sugar-free soda, which again, we think that's highly unlikely to happen. And so these funds are tied to that. So we have some concerns over that. Another piece that is new, this was not in House File 3 to begin with. It's not something I don't think we've seen for a few years proposed, is mandating participation in the SNAP Employment and Training Program for all able-bodied adults without dependents as a condition of receiving SNAP. So able-bodied adults without dependents is a term used by the federal government. It's people between ages 18 to 49 who do not have a disability and do not have any dependents in the household. The way it's written now, it says it's a requirement for all. We have questions of whether that would even require people who are already meeting the work requirement for that group, if they would also need to participate in this training program. We think the SNAP employment and training program is a good thing, but we really do believe it should be a voluntary program and not mandatory. There's also some additional Medicaid pieces in House File 613 that I'm not going to get into because I've talked long enough about these bills. So where are they in the process? On the Senate side, it's been placed on the debate calendar, and we could see a floor debate on this bill really any day in the Senate with very little notice. The way that they've been running debates in the Senate this session, sometimes we're finding out late in the evening what is going to be debated the next day. So really, we're just keeping our eyes peeled and really encourage everyone to reach out to their senators, sooner rather than later. House File 613, that was referred to the Appropriations Committee. Which is kind of a good thing, kind of a bad thing. It means we have another opportunity to testify at a subcommittee. That has not been, a meeting time has not been assigned yet, but it also means that bill is now funnel proof for the second funnel. So Um, it does mean we have a little bit of time on the House side. One thing we've been really highlighting with legislators is that, these bills will increase administrative hurdles and they will lead to people being removed from SNAP and other public assistance programs, including people well below the asset limit. Um, and we've got resources on our website that you can point to, but this is really something I think that needs to be raised because what we've been hearing from some legislators is that these bills are about protecting the programs for the quote unquote truly needy. um but I think that what we've seen in other states and what evidence has shown is that these types of administrative hurdles will just remove people from the program who can't meet the reporting requirements, throw up their arms in frustration because they've already jumped through so many hoops to try and get these benefits, and maybe they've decided that the benefits that they would get are just simply not worth the time it would take to apply. We have also still not seen a fiscal note on these bills, and we don't know how much this is going to cost the state of Iowa. But what we do know from previous bills and previous fiscal notes that we've seen proposed is that administrative costs for SNAP will only increase as a result of these bills. So I've got a graph here. This is the past, it's either 10 or 12 years of administrative costs for SNAP. And those are split 50-50 between the state and federal government. And as you can see, they've remained relatively stable. SNAP benefits themselves are 100% federally funded. So any new policy we set in place that will increase administrative hurdles to remove people from the program will only cost the state money. So what can you do? You can contact your senator and representative. You can visit our Protect SNAP webpage, and I'll post that in the chat in a second. That has a link there where you can find who your legislators are. There's a link to we have SNAP Basics handouts for all senators and representatives in the state. So you can share the latest SNAP statistics with them. You can also reach out to the members of that appropriations subcommittee for House File 613. These are the 5 legislators on that subcommittee. I will also make sure when we send up follow-up details that we include this as well. Some specific asks that you can include when you're reaching out to legislators, especially when it comes to senators, ask them to vote no if this comes to the floor. I think we might see some amendments on specific things, so you could always ask if they would vote to remove the asset test. You can also just ask that they wait until taking further action until we see a fiscal note, because at this point we don't know what it's going to cost. And then when you're reaching out to House members, you can ask to remove the contingent language that ties that double up food bucks funding to the soda and candy ban, and also ask them to remove the mandatory SNAP employment and training. But honestly, this is kind of in the weeds. The best thing to do is reach out, ask them to vote no, and tell them why this will impact you and the work that you do. Ask them if you are working at a food pantry or meal distribution site or a food bank, ask them to come visit you and your organization. Take a tour, understand what you do, you know, have them see and meet people firsthand who are using this program. And obviously, better yet, let's just let this bill die. Um, I'm I'm not maybe that optimistic at this point of that happening, which is why we've got some other of these asks included here. Something we continue to talk about is, this legislation really is a solution in search of a problem. We know that SNAP enrollment in the state of Iowa is at a 14-year low. Meanwhile, we have food banks and food pantries and other anti-hunger organizations seeing record-breaking numbers of people turning to them for assistance. That tells me that we really should be making sure that we're increasing access to the program, that we're investing in double up food bucks, raising the income eligibility for SNAP. Instead, these bills are a step in the wrong direction. So this is my attempt at a segue into some community updates. And just want to hear from folks, what are you seeing in your community right now? And maybe what concerns you about these bills? So that I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor.
I'll just share. I'm Southwest Iowa. We have two representatives in this area that serve on the Health and Human Services Committee, one of which is the vice chair of that committee. When this was first out, neither one of them understood what was in the bill at all. And they had no concept of the car situation, which was the earliest thing. So that's part of the, seems like we shouldn't have to educate, but we do. I work primarily with a 501c3 Feed the Pack program that we created in 2018 to deal with weekend food program for students in the Southwest Valley school districts, created with a Lilly grant, $5,000 Lilly grant with total donations. We feed weekend programs and it's eligible to those kids that are on free and reduced lunch. We've seen an uptick in the utilization there. We also take food boxes to from Food Bank for the Heartland. It's where our food bank comes from because Montgomery County is the dividing line. So that's west of there is Food Bank for the Heartland out of Omaha. We're seeing an uptick there also. Our food pantry in our small town, Villisca, at one point ran out. And a call went out and we had grocery carts of stuff by the end of the day by people just bringing food in to donate. But there's also higher utilization of that. It's run primarily by Interchurch Council. So that's what we're seeing in the rural areas, which folks tend to think that poverty is not a rural situation. And I'm here to tell you that it is, particularly in southern Iowa. So that's what's going on out here on the far side of the state.
Thank you so much for sharing. And yes, hunger and food insecurity exists across the state, no matter what county, no matter what small town you're in. And I will just plug again those handouts that we have, and you can really see every single legislator has hundreds of people that they represent who are using SNAP. So others willing to share what they're seeing right now?
I can, Luke. Let me turn my video on. I am very new to this process in action, not new in trying to learn. I have just recently joined a brand new food pantry dedicated to the west side of Davenport. It was originated because of the need on that side of town. What I have learned since, I'm also very interested in supporting local growers and awareness of the need for supporting local growers. So I'm trying to learn about this double up bucks and the potential for folks to access locally grown fruit and veg. That said, there are only two that I can tell from your website that I really thought was fabulous. There are only two double up bucks access sites, one being a small Fairway grocery store on the west side, and the other being the giant over the top farmers market in just off the river in downtown Davenport. That seems kind of paltry. So I'm here to learn more about that and just try to educate folks with what I've learned, including contacting my reps and the 5 people on the subcommittee. So I'm very interested. Thank you very much for what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia, for sharing. I will add maybe just a little more information on Double Up Food Bucks, and probably should have had a slide on this too, because were the state to invest $1 million in Double Up Food Bucks, we would actually see a total of $4 million in investments due to some private and federal matching funds for the program. So actually by tying this money to that ban, it's not just tying up $1 million, it's a potential of $4 million. But Claudia, you're right, it is just a pilot program. It's not something that's statewide. It's not at every SNAP retailer. Ideally, we would like to see this program expanded beyond where it is in the state and at the federal level. But that's kind of what we're working with right now, and kind of building incrementally the program. But you're right, it's not a statewide thing, and that's another reason why just having that piece in there, um, to me is not enough to sway my support for the bill at all, because that's a one-time investment in a program that's not statewide versus these lasting changes to the eligibility for the program that's going to affect thousands of people down the road.
That really helps. Thank you.
Others want to share?
Hey, this is Mary Reedy with Iowa Community Action Association. Quick, I guess, update, or I guess a question out to the group as well if they've heard anything on this. One of our local agencies was approached by a reporter from the Washington Post specifically about SNAP in Iowa and what this bill could potentially do. And I didn't know if others had been in contact with that reporter, or if there's, like Luke, especially if we want to send them your way for any comments. They're trying to connect with some families in South Central Iowa right now about how the bill would affect them. But that was something that she had just notified us of a little bit ago. So I wanted to bring that.
Yes, I believe I know who you're talking about. And I did speak with them, and I also sent them like a dozen different leads. So yeah, I knew that they had spoken to a few people.
Yeah, hi, this is EJ with Save the Children Action Network. They reached out to Washington Post reached out to us too, and we made sure to tell them to talk to Common Good, Iowa Action Agency, and other groups that are represented here. So we're just trying to kind of funnel the national outlets through this group. So glad to hear that happened. It's great.
I know we had a few people share kind of what they're seeing at their local community in terms of number of people who are, turning to assistance programs. I know that's something we continue to see in the Des Moines area. We see both, um, a high number of new people who have never used a food pantry before, but also a lot of people who maybe did not need to use a food pantry for the last 2 or 3 years that are continuing to return. And I know in speaking with other folks, that seems like it's a bit of a common thread, but wondered if that has been a similar experience in other parts of the state.
Luke, this is Nikki at Table to Table, and I'm not sure if any folks from Johnson County are here, but we're certainly seeing that. 2019, so we recover food from grocery stores and things. And in 2019, like sometimes it was difficult to make sure the truck was empty at the end of the day, just because of capacity. And today, sometimes they rarely make it to the last stop, like the last delivery stop. And so in the last 3 years, and numbers are challenging, right? But it's my best estimation that we've went from around 16,000 folks utilizing pantries in Johnson County to 22. So, and then in addition to increase in number of people, we also know that based on the table food sort of disappearing, and then the amount that folks that they're visiting more often, and relying more heavily. It's less supplemental, which, we had hoped with SNAP and those kinds of supports that pantries are supplemental, and that's just not the case anymore.
Thank you for sharing, Nikki. Yeah, it sounds very similar to what we're seeing in the Des Moines Metro as well. Any others want to share? Or maybe some stories you've heard from, folks that have come through that really stuck with you?
Hey, Luke, I just wanted to share a story that I heard from one of our volunteers at Sioux City, Iowa. She's a mom that works overnights in a non-traditional timeline as an auditor at a local hotel. She has 2 children with challenges, both with mental, social, and emotional issues that she's got to take her kids to and from multiple doctor's appointments, mental health appointments, so on and so forth. That doesn't even cover the amount of time that she's trying to take for her own self, for her own mental health, to be able to deal with all those challenges. And one of the things that she said was she absolutely echoed exactly what you're saying, which is if they have to be required to do one more thing, then there's just really no reason for her to try to be self-sufficient. And so I think that that's something that we really that definitely resonates with a lot of with some of the lawmakers that I've spoken with. Just that it's really not sustainable already, and to pile on more burdens and more requirements is really going to hurt the people that are already needing those assistances. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing, EJ. Anyone else?
I had something I wanted to throw out there really quick. It's not necessarily a story. And sorry, Luke, also, I have not touched base with you about this, but in thinking about, how our strategies might be shifting now that, on the Senate side, it could come before the full chamber at any time. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but I know the Iowa Hunger Coalition in the past has put out press releases with information about the anticipated impacts, and has really centered those press releases on the stories of Iowans using the program. And just I felt like that has been really successful, because we're getting out our messaging. Folks are able to share their stories, maybe anonymously, in a way that feels comfortable to them. And it feels a little different than, when the press is contacting you and they have specific questions, you can get out your story. And so I don't know if there will be a time where it makes sense for us to do that kind of a press release, but I just wanted to put that out there. If folks, across the state have any interest in sharing a story or know someone who might want to do that, because I think these bills this year, it feels a little different to me. You know, we've been seeing these bills for 5 years. This is the most coordinated I think I've ever really seen them on the House and the Senate side. And I'm hopeful because of everyone in this room and the fantastic work you're doing. And at the same time, I'm kind of worried. I'm more worried than I have been. And just thinking about even what we were talking about earlier in terms of that, some of that national media attention that we've seen, and thinking about, you know, how is that playing into the landscape here, and how can we take some of that momentum and move it forward? Because I know people were really understandably outraged about the WIC language. It's frustrating that legislators don't know how the WIC program works, but for those folks who are, you know, really angry about that piece, how can we make sure that they're still engaged on the asset test and all these other pieces? So sorry, those are just a bunch of fluttering thoughts that I have, but I just appreciate the work that everyone here is doing. And if you are interested in any other kind of advocacy, whether it's like writing an op-ed or, you know, getting stuff out to mobilize folks in your network, just think of the Iowa Hunger Coalition as a resource, please, and never hesitate to reach out to me or Luke. So I'm going to stop talking now.
That was perfect. You gave me just enough time to grab this link. We actually have a Google form that you can use to submit a story. Please share that. That's also on our Protect Snap page. And Natalie, in terms of when is a good time, I think that's something that we can work on right away. We've already got somewhere around 24 of those stories shared through that form this session. That we've shared some on social media and in blog posts, but I think a press release highlighting some of those quotes would be great. And if you have any, either from your organization or folks that you've worked with, we would love to include those. I'm going to send out an email after this with a recording of this, with a link to those slides. And then if you just want to follow up in an email there or use that form, we'll try to get something together in the next few days, because I think that's a great idea. EJ, great question I just saw in the chat in terms of other state examples. That's something we can try to get to you. I think Natalie has some of that on these pieces. I know we've got the Pennsylvania example for the asset test that I can send you a few articles about. So
what I was specifically asking for, Luke, is like, you know, for instance, in the center around the Tennessee example, right? If we have scan staff in those states, I could ask them to ask one of their volunteers to write a letter or put a call in to key lawmakers and say, you know, in my state, this is how it's rolled out. So like actual stories and actual constituents for some of those places. I think another thing I would mention is scan is always, thanks, Tom. There's also, you know, SCAN has volunteers or myself that can lead advocacy trainings on some of these skill sets that Natalie mentioned. So Natalie, I would love to, you know, partner with you or Luke or just offer that as something, if folks are interested in those nuts and bolts, just so that we can get some turnaround quickly. So let me know if that's interesting. Our next community action team meeting in Central Iowa is the last Wednesday of the month. So that'll be, I think, the 28th or the 29th of March. And so we could invite people, you know, in to Skype in or excuse me, I guess nobody uses Skype anymore, to Zoom into that meeting. And we can include a training component of that, and they can jump off or stay on for that as well. So just let me know what would be the easiest way to help. And I'll put some resources to it, okay?
EJ, were you thinking like writing letters to the editor, that sort of thing, or what specific?
I think to Natalie's point, I think we need to decide what exactly is it that we need to what do we need to happen in order for us to say we have what do we need to happen in order for us to say we've achieved some kind of victory? So what needs to happen? So killing the bill is one thing, but peeling off some lawmakers on the right maybe, or just something that's achievable in addition to the aspirational, right? And then figure out who exactly are these lawmakers that will help us, or who are the targets that will help us achieve that momentary goal. And then what we can do is we can develop tactics to be able to achieve that. If we want to generally increase the conversation, and we feel like that's going to be helpful in order for us to put pressure on those targets, then we shift to primarily those tactics. So like writing letters to the editor, writing blog posts, so on and so forth. So that's some strategy conversation. And I think that the small group that meets about strategy could discuss and then roll it out to the rest, or we could just try what we can with the short of time that we have and get that to happen. So it's really up to the leaders of this group.
Yeah, EJ, I think that's a great thought. I'm gonna follow up in an email, because I think, yeah, let's talk strategy and who we might kind of put our more efforts and focus on. Any other questions about the bills? What folks are seeing? Any like happy, positive things people want to share? Feel like we're due for some of that, maybe. The sun's out a little bit.
There are questions in the chat, if you can see those.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're okay. So I see Deb's got a question about share more about the connection of these bills with Medicaid, and is there an estimate of how much fraud is taking place with SNAP in Iowa? So great questions. So some of the pieces of these bills affect all public assistance programs. And some are just SNAP, some are just Medicaid. So the asset test, that is specific for SNAP. The identity verification process, the real-time eligibility, that is for public assistance programs, SNAP included, also Medicaid. Then in the House bill, there's the able-bodied adults without dependents, mandatory employment and training, that's specific to SNAP. There's the SNAP soda candy ban. And then on the Medicaid side, there in House File 613, it's basically work reporting requirements for Iowans who get their Medicaid through the Medicaid expansion program, the Iowa Health and Wellness Program. So that would be a requirement to either work, volunteer, or participate in some sort of educational training program, or a combination of those three for at least 20 hours a week to receive Medicaid. That also requires federal approval, and the Supreme Court has already basically shut that down. So I think that's highly unlikely we would actually see that be implemented in the state. Then there's also another piece I'm not super knowledgeable on, but it basically kind of tightens up some of the income eligibility around Medicaid, around qualifying for Medicaid. So it's called like the reasonable compatibility standard. They're reducing it from 10% to 5%. And again, I'm not super knowledgeable on Medicaid, so I'm sorry, but there are some pieces to Medicaid that are within the other overarching pieces of this bill, and then there are some specific ones in House File 613. As to the estimate of how much fraud is taking place with SNAP in Iowa, this was a question that came up in the committee meeting, and Representative Ann Meyer shared a figure from a report from the Department of Inspections and Appeals, which found I think it was 7.1 million. The number she shared was 8 million, but that included some other programs that were not SNAP. I think the report said that there was 7.1 million in fraud detected. That was both payments that had already gone out that people were then needing to pay back. And it was also basically cost savings for the future because people were removed from the program. That's a fraud rate of less than 1%. There were also, I think, 200, 300 people removed from the program for intentional program violations, which is basically fraud. And that was less than 0.1% of all people on SNAP in Iowa. So that is something that has come up. I think it's good to have those statistics. Maybe that's something I need to add to the Protect SNAP page, because that will get brought up. But I think it's evidence that we have systems in place to find and identify fraud when it does exist, but also to keep in mind that, again, this is a fraud rate of less than 1%. You're going to be pushing off a lot more people than that by putting these bills through than, the current identified fraud that exists. Yes, EJ, I will add that. Or I don't know if that's what you were talking about in your comment. So please let me know if there's something else I need to add. Any other questions I missed in the chat? I'm sorry, I haven't been doing a great job.
I would also add, excuse me, just as a citizen, it would be good to know which legislators are willing to listen and perhaps split from the party line, in this case, the Republicans. And to me, it seems like that would be dollars and cents that would help them split. But the stories are really, really good if people are willing to share them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. I think it's going to be really important to get that fiscal note. And I also think we'll have another discussion with some folks in the coalition to kind of talk around identifying who those target legislators are that could be persuadable. Because when we saw the House vote in committee, there were 2 Republicans who voted against House File 3. And so that tells us that the party's members are not in complete lockstep on this. And I think the fiscal note is going to work in our favor because it has in the past. It's cost, millions of dollars to kick people off the program. So we'll have some other discussions and come up with that list that you were asking for of who are maybe some key people we need to reach out to, because I think that's really important. So Tom, you have a lot more experience in this than I do. Will there need to be a fiscal note before this gets voted on in the Senate?
Yes, technically there would have to be a fiscal note because anything that would cost reasonably like more than $100,000 by their own rule, there has to be a fiscal note. I'm going to follow up on that. And also it could be like the night before they vote, there could be a fiscal note. So
that was my follow-up, is how soon do they need to drop it before they vote on it? So I guess you answered that. But thank you. That's important to know. So we should have a cost estimate before it actually comes to the floor. And if it's significant enough, maybe that will at least give them pause. But great thought, Deb and EJ for talking about that. Let's get that list made. Any other questions, suggestions? We got about 10 minutes left in the hour. I'm fine with ending early, but want to make sure everyone's had an opportunity to share. I'm sorry. I missed Caitlin's question 2 times now about what's considered an asset. So I think Tom had linked to the federal code, uh, which you can look up. There's some things that are excluded from the asset test by the federal regulations. So that's basically one residence and surrounding property. So if someone owns a home, that's not going to count against it. If they own an additional property, it would. I actually think if they're renting it out, they can subtract some of it due to a landlord status. If you have specific questions about that, you can ask me, and I'll do some more digging. Retirement accounts are exempt. Children's college fund savings accounts are exempt. Savings accounts, though, just general savings accounts are not. I think there's an exemption for the first $2,000 in cash assets. I could be wrong on that. But you know, if you look through the definitions in the bill and look up that federal code, and if you want to follow up with any questions about specifics, just let me know. But yeah, any other thoughts? Yes, jet skis are not exempted. It's specifically not exempted. Thank you, everyone. I will follow up with a recording of this with the slides. And we will also follow up with some information about a press release. And we'll be having a conversation about targeting some key legislators, and we'll get back to you all with information on that soon. So thank you all. Feel free to reach out at any time to our Gmail account. We'll try to do the best to respond in a timely manner. But thank you all for being a part of the discussion today, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.